You close your eyes. You beg for deliverance. You plead with heaven to rip this suffocating demon of lust directly out of your mind forever. An hour passes. Why are you staring at the exact thing you just prayed against? Have you ever walked away from prayer feeling stronger for a moment, only to crash harder than before? This cycle terrifies you. The guilt and shame overwhelm you. You promise God this will be the last time. Then temptation comes back with surprising force, and the shame feels even heavier because you had just spoken to God. Before long, you stop fearing lust. You start fearing prayer itself, and you wonder if your faith is just a broken illusion. But what if nothing is wrong with prayer? What if the problem is what you expect prayer to do? You expect God to remove the desire, erase the temptation, and silence every sinful thought, while God may actually be preparing you to stand in the middle of the battle instead of escaping it. Could your expectation be fighting against God's design? Jesus never promised a life without enemies. In Luke 10:19, he said, "Behold, I have given you authority to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy." Notice the wording carefully. He gave you authority over the enemy. He never promised to remove every enemy from your path. That changes everything. Imagine a king handing his soldier a sword instead of clearing the battlefield. The battlefield remains, the enemy remains, but the soldier now carries authority that he did not possess before. If the king removed every battle, how would the soldier ever learn to fight? Paul understood this lesson in a painful way. 3 times he pleaded with God to remove what tormented him. Yet God answered in 2 Corinthians 12:9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God did not ignore Paul's prayer. He answered it differently. Why would God sometimes leave the struggle while increasing your strength? The same principle appears throughout Scripture. God parted the Red Sea, but Israel still had to walk through it. David received God's promise, but Goliath was still standing there. Daniel trusted God, but the lions were still hungry. God often changes the person before he changes the situation. You pray against lust. You name the demon. You spend 20 minutes intensely focusing on how much you want God to take away this highly specific, incredibly graphic temptation. Your brain absorbs the imagery. Is it any wonder the temptation strikes with double the force the moment you stand up? It is like forcing a floating volleyball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more violently it will surge back to the surface with twice the power. Your weakness is required. Your struggle is necessary. If God simply reached down and surgically removed your capacity for lust, you would be a puppet, completely incapable of choosing love or demonstrating real discipline. You must have friction. How else could you ever learn to wield the authority you were given? Picture a simple bell curve. Temptation always follows a very specific bell curve, starting as a small whisper, a moment of isolation, a pressure email, or a sudden image flashes across the screen. And before we know it, it turns into a screaming peak, feeling entirely permanent. But the peak always falls. Why do we always act as if the peak will last forever? You feel the ocean swell within you. You assume that because the urge is escalating, it will inevitably crush you unless you either give in immediately or pray for an instant miracle. You abandon your authority. What if you simply watch the wave rise instead of fighting the water? Neuroscientist Russell Poldrack has shown through habit research that repeated behaviors become increasingly automatic over time because the brain builds efficient pathways for familiar routines. That means relapse is rarely a random event. It usually follows a predictable pattern that has been strengthened through repetition. Prayer cannot be treated like an emergency brake after the car has already fallen off the cliff. Prayer is meant to shape the driver long before the dangerous turn arrives. God transforms your mind before he transforms your moment. That is why Romans 12:2 says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." There is a technique. It is called urge surfing. Clinical psychologist Dr. Alan Marlatt developed this approach for addiction, proving that if you simply observe an urge without fighting it or feeding it, the neurological wave crests and subsides on its own. The brain eventually calms. Will you let the urge peak without throwing fuel on the fire? You map the curve. You expect the peak. When the urge to relapse hits you, you do not frantically pray for God to magically suppress the thought, because you know suppression feeds the beast. You just breathe through it. Can you stand still while the storm reaches its highest point? You master the bell curve. You ride the wave down. By allowing the temptation to exist in your mind without acting on it or panicking over it, you train your brain to realize this demon has no actual teeth. The scorpions lose their sting. Are you beginning to see how your authority actually works? The practices are simple. You acknowledge the trigger. You calmly tell God that you feel the pull of the flesh. You ask Him to stand with you on the wave. And you wait for the biological peak to subside. You do not run. Can you give your brain the time it needs to lower the temperature? You shift your posture. You stop demanding magic. You realize that true spiritual maturity is not the absence of dark thoughts, but the quiet, steadfast refusal to let those thoughts dictate your physical actions. You become the observer. The sort of authority that you threw away, you pick it back up. You realize you're not the man with no enemies. You are the man who can sleep peacefully, surrounded by wolves. You change your prayers. You ask for endurance. You stop asking God to take away your free will by erasing your temptations, and you start asking Him for the grit to crush the snakes underfoot. You claim your rightful authority. Will you finally step into the identity of a warrior instead of a victim? The promise is survival. Read 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. God promises that no temptation will overtake you, but that when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. He provides the exit. Are you willing to walk through the door of endurance instead of the trap door of escape? You open your eyes. You embrace the fight. You no longer expect heaven to rip this demon out of your mind because you finally know how to crush it yourself. You step forward. You close your eyes. You do not beg for deliverance, and you smile at the exact thing you just prayed against. You remember your authority.